Um, so this morning it's obviously the start of a new year, and this is the first ministry of the new year. So, as we say, here we go again. It's a new year, isn't it? Perhaps we've got New Year's resolutions. That's a good thing that we all do. Maybe you've had a junk clear out. What do you do with it? Do you sell it or tip it, charity shop, give it away for free? We also want to be healthier, maybe eat healthy, keep fitter. And if you'd listen to Chris's prayer, our prayers are often full of new hopes, aren't they, for things that we want. We have hopes of a new start, sometimes to wipe the slate clean and start again. But just asking each one of you, you obviously can't answer, but what do you usually do at New Year? A new beginning, a new start. I bet you it was different this year. Our lives can be so full of clutter, can't they? Our minds, our lives, our activities, everything. We're bombarded by advertising, by facts and news, new rules and advice. So admit it now, who fully understands the complexities of the new tier systems that we have? I'll bet probably nobody. So just say Happy New Tier to everybody. A long time ago, well, it seems like a long time ago, I remember going to see a film. This is how long ago, and Sue will know this. It was at the ABC Pictures in Wigan. Yeah, it was a long time ago, and it was called Star Wars. And you know, as a young kid, I might have had a very young kid at the time. I remember, I saw it a few times, and as they released the other films, they then re-edited that, and they added a title onto the end of that, which we know it as now. It was called Star Wars at first, and then they added A New Hope. Because all the other films, Return of the Jedi, The Empire Strikes Back, they all had additional titles, so they had to add it to the first one as well. And we all know the storyline, don't we? If you've not seen it, this is a bit of a spoiler. And the initial setup was that Princess Leia was trying to recruit an old retired Jedi called Obi-Wan Kenobi to join with the rebellion. And she even sends a message with the little robot R2-D2 that says, "Help me, Obi-Wan, you're my only hope." Well, if only that were true, then the movie should have been called An Old Hope. On the off chance you've not seen the film yet, then maybe this is a bit of a spoiler again, but Obi-Wan wasn't the hope. It was actually Luke Skywalker. He turns out to be the new hope. Princess Leia had put her hope in the wrong person, and it turns out that Luke is her twin brother, and the evil Darth Vader is her dad. Leia's hope for a new start was placed in the past with Obi-Wan. She didn't see the future. She didn't see the possibilities and the hopes. She wanted something from the past to present her with a future. But it's probably because I've spent a long time watching the Star Wars films. I can see a connection between the Star Wars films and the message it gives and a well-known passage of scripture. If you want to follow this, it's a fairly lengthy reading. It's in Numbers 13. And it's the story of the 12 men who were sent to spy in Canaan. And we know the song, don't we? When we sing it with the kids, we sing 12 men went to spy in Canaan, 10 were bad and 2 were good. That's what we sing, and we teach the children that. So starting in Numbers 13, the Lord said to Moses, "Send some men to check out the land of Canaan. I am giving it to the Israelites. Send one leader from each of Israel's tribes." And I think that's something I'd overlooked before, is that the 12 men that were sent into the land were leaders from the tribes. They weren't just ordinary men, they were leaders. So it goes on. Moses sent them out from the desert of Paran. He sent them as the Lord had commanded. All of them were leaders. It states it again there in verse 3. All of them were leaders of the Israelites. And then it lists the leaders there. Verse 17, Moses sent the 12 men to check out Canaan. He said, go up through the Negev desert, go on into the central hill country, see what the land is like, see whether the people who live there are strong or weak, see whether they are few or many. What kind of land do they live in? Is it good or bad? What kind of towns do they live in? Do the towns have high walls around them or not? How is the soil? Is it rich land or poor land? Are there trees in it or not? Do your best to bring back some of the fruit of the land. It was the season for the first ripe grapes. So the men went up and checked out the land. They went from the desert of Zin as far as Rehob. It was in the direction of Lebor Hamath. They went up through the Negev desert and came to Hebron. That's where Ahiman and Seshai and Telemai lived. They belonged to the family of Anak. Hebron had been built 7 years before Zoan. Zoan was a city in Egypt. The men came back to the valley of Eshcol. There they cut off a branch that had a single bunch of grapes on it. 2 of them carried it on a pole between them. They carried some pomegranates and figs along with it. That place was called the valley of Eshcol. That's because the men of Israel cut off a branch of grapes there. At the end of 40 days, the men returned from checking out the land. Men came back to Moses, Aaron, and the whole community of Israel. The people were at Kadesh in the desert of Paran. There, the men reported to Moses and Aaron and all the people. They showed them the fruit of the land. They gave Moses the report. They said, we went into the land you sent us to. It really does have plenty of milk and honey. There's some fruit on the land. But the people who live there are powerful. The cities have high walls around them and are very large. We even saw members of the family of Anak there. The Amalekites live in the Negev desert. The Hittites, Jebusites, Amorites live in the central hill country. The Canaanites live near the Mediterranean Sea. They also live along the Jordan River. And Caleb interrupted the men speaking to Moses. He said, we should go up and take the land. We can certainly do it. But the men who had gone up with them spoke. They said, we can't attack these people. They are stronger than we are. The men spread a bad report about the land among the Israelites. They said, the land we checked out destroys those who live in it. All the people we saw there are big and tall. We saw the Nephilim there. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes. And that's also how we seemed to them. The family line of Anak came from Nephilim. And over to chapter 14. That night, all of the members of the community raised their voices. They wept out loud. The Israelites spoke against Moses and Aaron. The whole community said to them, we wish we had died in Egypt or even the desert. Why is the Lord bringing us to this land? We're going to be killed by swords. Our enemies will capture our wives and children. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt? They said to one another, we should choose another leader. We should go back to Egypt. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, how long will this evil community speak against me? I have heard these Israelites talk about how unhappy they are. So tell them, here is what I'm announcing. I'm the Lord, you can be sure that I live. And here is what you can be just as sure of. I will do to you the very thing I heard you say. You will die in the desert. Every one of you, 20 years old or more, will die. Every one of you who is counted in the list of the people will die. Every one of you who has spoken out against me will be wiped out. I lifted up my hand and promised to make this land your home. But now, not all of you will enter the land. Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, will enter it. So will Joshua, the son of Nun. They are the only ones who will enter the land. You have said that your enemies will capture your children, but I will bring your children in to enjoy the land you have turned your backs on. As for you, you will die in the desert. So the Lord struck down the men Moses sent to check out the land. They returned. They had returned and had spread a bad report about the land, and that had made the whole community speak out against Moses. Those men were to blame for spreading the bad report, so the Lord struck them down. They died of a plague. Only 2 of the men who went to check out the land remained alive. One of them was Joshua, son of Nun. The other was Caleb, son of Jephunneh. Moses reported to all the Israelites what the Lord had said, and they became very sad. Early next morning, they set out the highest point of the hill country. We have sinned, they said. Now we are ready to go to the land the Lord promised to give us. Moses said, "Why aren't you obeying the Lord's command? You won't succeed, so don't go up. The Lord isn't with you. Your enemies will win the battle over you. The Amalekites and the Canaanites will meet you on the field of battle. You have turned away from the Lord, so he won't be with you, and you'll be killed by swords." But they wouldn't listen. They still went up towards the highest point on the hill country. They went up even though Moses didn't move from the camp. They went even though the ark of the Lord's covenant didn't move from the camp. Then the Amalekites and the Canaanites who lived in that hill country came down. They attacked the Israelites. They won the battle over them. They chased the Israelites all the way to Hormah. That's a sad story, isn't it, of Israel's state of mind. Israel had seen God's might and power time and time again, hadn't they? They'd seen the plagues in Egypt, the river that parted and they crossed over on the dry land, and then it fell back down over the Egyptians and they drowned. They'd seen God's leadership in a cloud by day and fire by night. They'd been sent quails and manna to eat, been given water to drink from dry rocks. In fact, they'd just seen God's might and power time and time again, yet they still doubted God's might and power. And it's when I read the story, it's not as if these 12 men went and didn't do a good job. They were there for 40 days. They did a really thorough job of looking around. And when they came back, they made the notes and came back, and 10 of the spies were afraid of taking the land. Caleb and Joshua still had the faith that God would help them to take it, but the 10 spies convinced the rest of the Israelites that certain doom was ahead of them. And then we see in chapter 14, all the people were afraid. They were afraid that they would be killed in the land that God had said was theirs, the land that God had said that they were going to inhabit. They said, "We wish we had died in Egypt." What a terrible thing to say. Or even the desert. Why would they say these sort of things apart from their lack of faith? They also said, "Our enemies will capture our wives and children. We're going to be killed with swords. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt?" They'd soon forgotten the slavery and the hardship of Egypt, hadn't they? Which was only a few years before. So Moses spends the rest of chapter 14 reminding them of what God already had done for them. He sort of told them off. He chastised them, didn't he, for the lack of faith. In fact, the 10 spies who gave the bad report were killed by a plague. That was their punishment. And the punishment for the rest of the people, well, everybody who was listed, who was 20 years or older, who'd spoke out against God, would die before they entered the promised land. Only Joshua and Caleb were allowed to enter. And because the people rebelled against the Lord and they lacked faith in his ability to help them take the land, they were subjected to 40 years of wandering in the desert. That seems to be one day for each day they explored the land and the 10 men found bad. So it's sad, isn't it, that it really comes to that. They used the term when they came back, Caleb and Joshua said, the land flowed with milk and honey. In fact, they all said that. It flowed with milk and honey. It was a great land. And it builds on the idea that this land would produce food that they could enjoy freely. It would have been a great place to head to. Up until now, they'd got by on manna and quail in the desert. Not that they ever were hungry or unhealthy, but in comparison to what the land would offer, it was nothing. They were allowed to have enough food for each day to make them get by. But imagine going into that land and taking those grapes, at one bunch of grapes which took 2 people to carry. It was a massive contrast for them, and it was meant to be so. Israel paid the price for the lack of faith to God. And with hindsight, I look back at that story and I say to myself, how could they? They'd seen all these great things God had done. And why didn't that give them a firm faith and a sure hope in God? And I say, I'd be very different if that was me. Imagine if every morning I came downstairs and the fridge and the cupboards in my kitchen were full of all the food we needed for that day. Everything was healthy, good food and drink, and we would never need a Tesco's delivery again. Boy, would that make my faith so strong that every morning we had everything we needed. Or would I? How long would that last? Being a human being, would it last a month, 6 months, a year, 5 years? I'd like to think not, because I already know God. I have a relationship with him and his son Jesus. But then so did Israel. They had a relationship with God. He brought them through so much and provided so well for them, and yet they had this lack of faith. I'd like to think that I would be different and I wouldn't be like the children of Israel, but we don't know. You see, the people of this world in general are always looking for something new and exciting and better, aren't they? They're always wanting something bigger and better. And some of these things are good hopes, like people hope for and work towards an end to poverty and homelessness. People and scientists and doctors and researchers want to end diseases like cancer. And peacemakers want to end wars. Green activists want to reduce pollution. And as a UK nation, we're hoping that these new vaccines, which we have, will take us back to some sense of normality. A normality perhaps where we can mix with others, where we can travel freely, where we can shop, where we can go back to work in offices and factories. We can take part in our hobbies and activities properly again instead of virtually. We can be free without restrictions. We're hoping, aren't we? But we cannot be sure. One thing is sure, though, I don't think we'll ever go back to the way we were at the start of 2020. This year, 2020, or last year, 2020, I should say, has changed the way we behave, we think, we live, we work, and it's probably changed things forever. Our own hopes for things are usually good hopes, aren't they? In fact, maybe we say, I hope the journey that I'm going to go on is safe, I don't have an accident. Or I hope this headache goes away soon. I hope I don't get sick. I hope I pass the exams. I hope I get a good job. And one of my friends often jokes, I just hope I wake up in the morning. There are all sorts of short-term hopes, aren't there? We hope we'll be safe and healthy and happy. Perhaps if we look at the dictionary and we define hope, it very clearly defines hope as a feeling that what is wanted can be had, or that events will turn out for the best. So it's a human feeling of something that's wanted and can be had, and it will turn out for the best. Hope is more than a simple feeling, though, isn't it? Hope is something we actually feel deep in our heart. Hope cannot be explained. It cannot be rationalized. Hope is something we experience. To be human is to have hope, isn't it? We've just celebrated Christmas, and that's when God gave a new hope 2,000 years ago to this world. He sent his son, which we've just celebrated in a very different way to perhaps we usually celebrate it. But I'd like to think that perhaps that's given people the time to step away from parties and excess and to see the message of Christmas more clearly, that God sent his son to give the world a new hope beyond just this realm. In Isaiah 9 it says, For unto us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called a Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. At the moment, this world does need a new hope, but this time we're living in is no different from any other time. This world has always needed a new hope, and that's what Jesus offers. I read the story of the two disciples on the road to Emmaus when Jesus came alongside them, and he explained to them the reason for hope is that God loved the world and he sent his son, that through the sacrifice of his only son, the debt of sin was forever paid, and through the resurrection, death had been defeated, and that those found right with God, those who come back to God, who have that faith, will live forever. And even better, this Messiah, in whom we place our hope, is coming back to rule a kingdom without end. That's the long-term hope God has for us and his people right now. We are God's people. We serve him, and that hope is real for us. It's not a hope that cannot be attained. It's definite. It's a promise that we will be part of that kingdom. And imagine those two disciples then, when Jesus explained everything to them. It says that the disciples were amazed when he explained everything. The story is found in Luke chapter 24. And these disciples said to each other in verse 32, they asked each other, were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures? Jesus started with the old stories and pointed out the Messiah throughout the gospel to those two people. I'm not sure how long that journey took because they were walking, but Jesus did a thorough job. Those disciples then in that early time had a tough time, didn't they? But they had a real hope. They had a firm faith and a firm desire and a firm grip on what was happening. So let's ask ourselves now, what do we put our hope in? If today you're feeling, as we say, at the end of your tether, you're out of options or generally just hopeless, then you may find a new hope in the risen Lord. I want us all to burn with that desire that the two disciples found in their hearts on that road to Emmaus. Their hearts burned with a desire because Jesus had spoke to them. But we have those same scriptures, we have those same stories, and as his disciples we have the Holy Spirit to help us to explain what the scriptures mean. Should we say, or I would like us to be able to say, our hearts burn within us in a desire to serve, because our heart is full of hope that can only come from knowing God. The hopes of this world are not the same. They're often short-term. God puts a hope in us and a desire in us that's long-term. So let's say, may our prayer for 2021 be, help me, Jesus Christ. You are my only hope. Shall we close in prayer?